I never thought I'd be writing this story, but here I am, trying to make sense of how my entire world turned upside down in just a few days. My wife and I, we weren't just any couple, we were the neighborhood's sweethearts, the kids who grew up next door to each other, who shared our first everything together. Both of us came from broken homes, and maybe that's what made us promise each other we'd be different. We'd build something better than what we grew up seeing. I work from home while my wife goes to the office. Her field is mostly male-dominated, and she often told me how it felt like a boys' club. There was this supervisor at her workplace who she said was one of the good ones, always looking out for her. Recently, my wife got promoted to supervisor herself, and I couldn't have been prouder. The new role meant she had to take occasional business trips throughout the year. Last week, she had her first trip, Wednesday through Friday. Before she left, we had our usual goodbye ritual. "I'm leaving my heart with you, take care of it," she said, just like she always does when we have to be apart. Little did I know those words would soon feel like daggers in my chest. Monday changed everything. She came home early from work, and I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her. Her face was overwhelmed with emotion, and there was a red mark on her right cheek. She's always bruised easily because of her pale skin. When I asked what happened, she just asked for a hug, saying she needed to feel my embrace. Then came the confession that shattered my world. She told me she had been with her former supervisor during the team lead trip. I sat there in complete silence, feeling like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. See, cheating isn't just another word for me. It's the very thing that tore my family apart when I was younger. I'm the one who caught my dad cheating and told my mom. My dad still blames me for ruining the family and has never forgiven me. The worst part? My wife knew all of this. She was there when I was a teenager, crying about my family falling apart. She held me then, comforted me. She knew exactly how deep these wounds ran, yet here she was, telling me she had done the same thing. The story came out in pieces. Apparently, her supervisor's wife had found out and showed up at their workplace, creating a scene in front of everyone. She had called my wife names and slapped her. That explained the mark on her cheek. After the chaos, my wife called her older sister, who told her she needed to come clean to me immediately. When I finally found my voice, I asked her what happened on the trip. She said it started with team drinks on the second night. The group slowly dispersed until it was just her and her former supervisor. They went to his room to listen to music. He started complimenting her, then kissing her, and then I couldn't bear to hear more details. I got up from the couch and told her to stop. When she tried to take my hand, I pulled away. "Don't touch me," I said. She broke down crying, begging for forgiveness, saying it was the biggest mistake of her life. She kept repeating how much she loved me, blaming the alcohol for clouding her judgment. She offered to quit her job, give me access to her phone, go to counseling, anything to fix what she had broken. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't even look at her. I told her she needed to leave, to call her sister for a pickup. When she wouldn't go, I decided to leave instead. I didn't even pack a bag. She grabbed my arm as I headed for the door, pleading that, after everything we've been through, this can't be the end of us. Despite everything she'd done, walking away while she cried tore me apart. Because I still love her, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. But she had taken that love and thrown our entire future away with one terrible choice. I drove to my mom's house, somehow keeping it together until I arrived. Then I broke down completely. My mom had never seen me cry as an adult. The only person who had ever seen my tears was my wife. I had to tell my mom everything. There was no hiding it in the state I was in. She and my wife had always been close, like mother and daughter. She didn't judge, just offered me a place to stay and tried to comfort me as best she could. My wife has been calling and texting constantly since I left, begging me to come home, to talk, asking where I am, pleading with me not to give up on us. But I just sit here, staring at my phone, drowning in memories of our life together. I always swore I'd never stay with someone who cheated. It was my one absolute deal breaker. But now with all our history, all our love, all our shared pain and joy, I find myself wondering if there's anything left to salvage. I keep thinking about how we always felt like matching puzzle pieces, how she was there for me when I thought I had no one else in the world. Now I'm lost, trying to figure out how to breathe in a world where the person I trusted most turned out to be capable of my greatest fear. After a week of dodging calls and messages, I knew I needed more answers. Something in my gut told me there was more to the story than what my wife had shared. That's when I decided to reach out to his wife, the woman who had confronted them at the office. I found her on Facebook and sent her a message, not really expecting a quick response. But within 10 minutes, she suggested a video call. The moment her face appeared on screen, I could see she was going through the same hell I was. She told me something that made my stomach turn. She had actually tried to find me right after the workplace confrontation. In fact, one of the last things she had said to my wife was that she was going to tell me everything. That explained why my wife had rushed home that day to confess. She wasn't being honest out of guilt. She was trying to control the narrative before someone else could tell me the truth. I asked if she knew more about what happened during the trip, if it was really just a one-time thing like my wife claimed. What she shared next made me feel like the floor had disappeared beneath me. She screen-shared texts between my wife and her husband, messages that went back months before the trip. The affair hadn't started with drunk team bonding. It had been building up since January. She told me how she first suspected something was wrong when her husband became distant at the start of the year. She'd noticed him texting my wife, but he always brushed it off as work stuff. Then, the day before the trip, she went to drop something off at his office and caught them standing close together, laughing and flirting. When they saw her, my wife's face had gone pale with panic. The texts she found were like bullets to my chest. Her husband had been pursuing my wife, saying he couldn't focus at work when she was around. He'd complain about his marriage, even saying horrible things about his wife's miscarriages, telling my wife he needed someone like her instead. My wife never shut down his advances. Never told him to stop. Never mentioned her husband, me, who was at home trusting her completely. The night of the team drinks, there were messages from him inviting my wife out, and then messages the next morning that left no doubt about what had happened between them. My wife hadn't responded to any texts after that night, but the damage was already done. His wife told me she had discovered all this while he was sleeping. Instead of confronting him immediately, she decided to wait and expose him at work, where he had spent so much time building his reputation. She wanted him to feel as humiliated as she did. It was just coincidence that my wife happened to be there when she showed up to confront him. The outcome of her public confrontation was swift. He was fired the next day. She kicked him out of the house, and now she's facing the hardest part, explaining to their twins why their family is falling apart. When she said this, all I could think about was watching my mom have the same conversation with me years ago. History keeps repeating itself in the worst ways. She actually apologized to me for her husband's role in all this, which left me speechless. Here was this woman, whose life was being torn apart just like mine, apologizing to me. I apologized back for my wife's part in it, and she said something that stuck with me. We're part of a club we never wanted to join, a club our spouses forced us into. Hearing all this, I felt a twisted kind of satisfaction, knowing he lost his job and his family, but that satisfaction quickly turned to guilt. Those kids didn't deserve any of this. They're about to go through the same pain I went through as a teenager, the same pain I swore I'd never let my own kids experience someday. But what hit me hardest was realizing my wife had put my health at risk. We'd been intimate after she returned from the trip, and from what I could tell in those texts, they hadn't used protection. Every new piece of information felt like another betrayal, another knife in my back. I knew I needed to confront my wife with what I'd learned, demand a complete timeline of events, but I felt even more lost than before. How do you even begin to have that conversation with someone who's already lied to you so completely? After talking with his wife, I went back to my mom's place and told her everything I'd learned. She tried to stay neutral, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. The woman who had treated my wife like a daughter for all these years was struggling to understand how this happened, just like me. I keep replaying memories in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. All those late nights at work that I never questioned because I trusted her completely. The way she'd talk about him being one of the good ones at work. The subtle changes in her behavior that I brushed off as stress from her new position. Were there red flags I was too blind to see? Or was I just fooling myself thinking I could have prevented this somehow? The text messages between them keep haunting me. His words pursuing her, and her silence in response. Not a silence of rejection, but of acceptance. Each message he sent was another moment where she could have chosen me, chosen our marriage, but didn't. Every time she responded to his flirting instead of shutting it down, she was making a choice. Small choices that led to bigger ones, until finally, they ended up in his hotel room. I find myself feeling angry one minute and devastated the next. Sometimes I catch myself smiling when a happy memory pops up, only to remember that the person in those memories isn't who I thought she was. The woman who held me while I cried about my dad's affair turned around and did the same thing to me. The irony would be funny if it didn't hurt so much. His wife and I text occasionally now. There's something comforting about talking to someone who understands exactly what this feels like. She's handling it with so much strength, focusing on her kids and already talking to lawyers. Meanwhile, I'm still stuck in this limbo, unable to decide what to do next. My mom keeps telling me I don't have to make any decisions right now, that it's okay to take time to process everything. But how do you process something like this? How do you handle discovering that the person you trusted most in the world, the one who was supposed to be different from all the broken relationships we grew up with, turned out to be capable of the very thing that broke us as kids? The hardest part is that I still love her. I wish I didn't. I wish I could just turn it off like a switch, but every time my phone lights up with her name, my heart still jumps. Even knowing everything she did, there's still this part of me that misses her. Not just as my wife, but as my best friend, the person who's been there for every important moment of my life since we were kids. But then I think about those text messages, about her letting him pursue her for months, about her only confessing because she got caught. I think about her crying and begging me not to leave, saying she'd do anything to fix this. But would she have ever told me if his wife hadn't exposed them? Would I have lived my whole life never knowing the truth if they hadn't been caught? I haven't replied to any of her messages yet. Each one feels like another crack in my heart. Please come home. I love you. We can fix this. Don't throw away everything we have. But what did she think she was doing when she threw it all away first? When she risked everything we built together for him? My mom found me crying in the guest room last night, looking at our wedding photos. She sat with me for a while, not saying anything, just being there. Finally, she told me something that made me think. She said that sometimes the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to walk away, and that forgiveness doesn't always mean staying together. I know I'll have to talk to my wife eventually. I'll have to hear her explanation for those messages, for all the lies, for every choice she made that led us here. But right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to exist in this new reality where the future I thought we had together is shattered, and I don't know if all the pieces can ever fit back together again. Maybe that's the cruelest part of all this, not knowing. Not knowing if I can ever trust her again. Not knowing if I should even try. Not knowing if walking away would hurt more or less than staying. All I know is that the life we had before is gone, and whatever comes next, whether we try to rebuild or go our separate ways, nothing will ever be the same.